Hi there. Welcome to Shrewd Wife Life. I'm Lillian. I'm not a psychologist and I haven't been to seminary. I've got one credential. I'm a survivor. Nearly 34 years. That's how long I lived in an abusive marriage without even realizing it. I believed everything I was taught about Christian marriage, and I trusted the system and its traditions instead of the Lord Himself. That phrase, without realizing it was abuse, please don't write it off. I did. I thought it couldn't happen to me. Through that journey, I've learned some interesting and some really disturbing facts about how wolves in sheep's clothing can stay hidden in marriage and even thrive inside the Christian community and churches. The clip you're about to watch is taken from my main video titled The Myth of Magical Biblical Submission. You can find a link for that in the description box. We see that with Sapphira. She had a choice to not submit to Ananias. It wasn't safe for her to align herself by submitting to and helping evil by being in agreement with it. She had the choice to come against evil leadership as the Neged. Our submission is to God first. Acts 5 verse 29. We were created first as daughters, so that's our primary identity. Doing the role of a wife doesn't supersede that original identity or the claim God has on your life. Luke 8, verse 16. Don't be like Sapphira. Submission is not the blind obedience of a wife. It's a response to a man who mirrors Christ's leadership through his own submission to God. So, as God's daughters, it's important to know when submission is truly a response to godly leadership, and when and why you might be feeling resistance. Because the feeling of not wanting to submit is a very real sensation for us. If you feel resistance in your body instead of the desire to submit, that's a major signal. In fact, it's the number one way you'll know whether you should submit or not. The problem is that we women often want to go into the analytical parts of our minds to decide if we should submit or not. There are two reasons we end up in that region instead of our bodies. The first reason we end up there is because we're trying to work it out logically if we agree with what we're being asked to submit to, like whether it's right or wrong. The second reason is because most of us have been taught that God wants us to submit 100% all the time without question, which then leads us back to the first reason. It's kind of like a ping-ponging of back and forth between yes and no. Should I or shouldn't I? All that analyzing is done in the problem-solving region of the brain, which takes us out of our bodies and away from our feelings. Then what happens is we end up asking the wrong question, on top of it being asked from the wrong area. It won't help you because that's not where the signal of resistance is coming from. It's not coming from your head. It's coming from your body. Women think with their emotions first, and then we analyze and decide whether to accept or reject. And this isn't just how femininity responds to masculinity in the one-flesh relationship. It's also how the role of the wife will respond to the leadership that's coming from the husband's role. A woman's always responding or receiving or rejecting, no matter what side of the marriage coin she's operating out of. When wives resist submission, it's because we feel something's off. There's a mixture of sadness, fear, and maybe even disgust. And these are three of the core feelings from your feelings wheel. For me, it was the feeling of being let down, not in a way of disappointment, but more like too vulnerable and unprotected. I felt unsafe, unsure, and insecure. This is key because it's where your autonomy lives. These signals from your feelings are your warning. They're the raw material that you work with in order to discern. When you resist submission from the analytical part of your mind, it can look like contention or rebellion because you've shifted your focus onto him and his actions. And that shift will make him defensive. And then in his defense, he will interpret it as a deficit in your personality. He'll label you like you're fearful, indecisive, or not a strong, godly wife. But honoring your feelings has nothing to do with him and everything to do with you and God. Your resistance isn't rebellion. It's the wisdom from your body. All those feelings and emotions from the estrogen that God created you with, they're always your starting point. A wise husband, he'll listen to his wife's emotions. God will talk to a husband through them. That's part of what he means when he says a man who gets married has a good thing in a wife. I paraphrased that. I will be sure to put up the actual verse when I edit. Don't ever be ashamed of your feelings and emotions. They're your safety mechanism, and they're a guide for your husband. A godly husband understands that all your emotions came from him and that, in part, they're for his benefit. But the wolf in sheep's clothing, like Nabal or Ananias, Acts chapter 5, he'll belittle the feelings or shame you because of them. How did your feelings and emotions come from the man? In the beginning, when God built Eve, he didn't use an actual rib. The word rib doesn't mean a literal rib. The thing that God is describing, we don't have an English word for. Our raw material is more like an essence or a compound. The two Hebrew words that the English has translated to be rib are meh and salah. The way it's described in Ezer is like the sound of a musical chord, the strings that make that sound. That chord was inside the man, and what God did was to separate the sound and take it out of him. But he didn't just take out one string of the chord. He took most of them, saying, say if a man was created with 6 strings, God took 5 of them and built them into another one, who was the opposite of Adam. All the feelings and emotions, they were extracted from the man and used to build the woman. So God left the man with mostly testosterone and only about 1 string's worth of estrogen. Your body will help the man. A good man, a godly man, will listen and try to understand. 1 Peter 3, verse 7. But a wolf won't listen. In my situationship, I know that's such a weird word, isn't it? But that is what I lived in for 32 years. It wasn't a marriage. Well, it was a government marriage, like on paper, but it wasn't a covenant relationship in God's kingdom. He doesn't join darkness with light to make a one-flesh relationship, because a wolf and a sheep can never represent Christ and his church. 2 Corinthians 6, verse 14. So in my situationship, for almost the whole time of 32 years, my body was giving me signals that were the equivalent to a siren, but I didn't know what it meant. I could feel them, but I had been told they were wrong and silly and bad and not trustworthy. When your feminine heart is unhealed, it's not that you can't feel your emotions. You absolutely can. You just don't understand what they're telling you. It's like someone was constantly yelling at me, but in a different language. So what I did was I shut them down a little bit more each year. Brokenheartedness means your feelings speak a language that you don't understand. Healing is how you learn to understand and speak the language of your estrogen. So my emotions and feelings were shamed not just by Dean, They were consistently shamed by counselors and all of the marriage material I had read. I remember sitting in a counselor's office and she said to me, "Gee, it sounds like you've read too many marriage books." I looked down at the table to think about what she had just said and how it didn't make sense and where it came from. And my eyes landed on the book that was sitting on her coffee table. It was the marriage book I had just finished reading. That messed with my heart and mind, something awful. Why didn't I say anything? Because I had shut down that inner woman so often she lost her voice. I couldn't even hear her anymore, so I couldn't advocate for myself, even a little. The defense system that God had wired me with for my self-protection was completely offline. A woman's feelings play a huge role in her life. Our emotional response, which is heavily influenced by estrogen, that's our God-given form of the cost-benefit analysis that runs in testosterone. It's as valid as a man's logical analysis, and we're designed to honor those feelings and emotions. A husband provides, and strategizes through that cost-benefit analysis that lives in his abundance of testosterone. And a wife's response comes through her abundance of estrogen, and that's her emotions and feelings. The level of submission in your response is a direct reflection of your husband's. He can't demand a deeper level of submission from you beyond what he offers to God himself. Well, he can demand it, but God does not obligate you to yield to it.